Hello, everyone, and welcome tonight. It is Sunday night, January 7th, 2024, and I'm Glenn Rawson. Tonight, I'm broadcasting from Wellsville, Utah. It's a beautiful community here on the west side of Cache Valley, settled in September of 1856, supposedly the first white settlement here in Cache Valley, and what a lovely community. I'm actually parked in the bunkhouse right next door to the tabernacle tonight as this fireside is being recorded. So anyway, that's where I am. And tomorrow I will be somewhere else. I hope you are well. Just a couple of announcements of things that are coming up. With Fun for Less tours, on May the 7th, they told me that there are still just a few openings for my church history tour that goes from New York to Nauvoo. That's a bus tour. So if you're interested in going on early church history tour from New York to Nauvoo, contact funforlesstours.com. Also with Fun for Less, I did this tour several years ago, absolutely loved it. One of my favorite tours in the whole world for scenery is the Arctic Circle. That tour will leave on July the 3rd, up the coast of Norway. If you'd like to go and see the fjords of Norway, be above the Arctic Circle, come with me. That starts on July 3rd. And then lastly, also with Fun for Less, August 27th, I'm doing a tour to the British Isles. Actually, two of them. I'll be over there for, nearly a month. So if you're interested in coming and doing a land tour of the British Isles, the stone fences, the little villages, the ancient churches, the old farms, the sheep on the hillsides, love it. That is leaving on August 27th, and I'm inviting you to come with me if you'd like to come. Now, as always, I would ask you tonight to have a prayer in your heart. There are some things I'm going to say on the mid-break, which I have debated for a long time whether I should say. So it's coming up at our mid-break. First story tonight. I teased it a little bit earlier this afternoon when I announced this fireside. My friend, Mick, is a cowboy and a rancher from Wyoming. He shared a story with me that really got me. A perspective that I want you to hear. He spoke of the spring of the year in Wyoming when the mother cows were brought down to the desert pastures to calve. And depending on age and condition, he talked about how the cows would be sorted and tended. The young first calf heifers were the ones that needed the most attention. They often had the most trouble in delivery. As they neared delivery, Mick spoke of Chris, the cattle foreman, and his crew of men that would sort them out and bring them into the sheltered calving stalls. And then he talked about how the men would rotate shifts, watching over those young heifers night and day to be there when they delivered. Many of them indeed needed help delivering that first calf. And sometimes, Mick described, the calf would be lost, and sometimes even the cow would be lost in the delivery. Speaking of Chris, the foreman, Mick said, I saw this young cowboy jumping with joy over saving a calf and then weeping when a calf was lost or born dead. End of quote. Mick went on to tell about Chris actually even setting up a trailer out in the desert in order to be closer to the cows, where day and night he would ride the herd looking for that lone cow off by herself to give birth. He checked the brush where they would often hole up, and sometimes Chris would even track those cows, but always he was there. And if a predator threatened the cows or the baby calves, Chris and his men stood between them and the predators. When the calving season ended, The cowboys would then take the herd up to the lush mountain pastures where the calves would feed and grow fat. And now, let me quote what Mick said. He said, quote, "When fall approaches, the aspen leaves turn yellow, covering the mountain slopes with a brilliant yellow. The mountain maples pop with their red crimson leaves. The air is clear, and across the canyon is heard the shrill bugle of the elk, all signs of an approaching seasonal change and the unavoidable onset of winter. The cattle are rounded up and brought down off the mountain to their birthplace. The calves are sorted away from the mothers and trucked off to market. As a ranch manager, this is an exciting time where the ranch receives its paycheck by selling the calves. As the auction proceeds, these beautiful calves enter the arena and the cattle brokers begin their bids. I look over at my cattle foreman, Chris. He's in tears. Looking over at me, he indicates he can't stay when he leaves the auction. Right there. Noted. Why is Chris, the cowboy, in tears and can't stay? Mick concludes with this powerful lesson. He said, "I never eat a steak or any meat without thanking God for the sacrifice our animals make on our behalf. I also thank God for good cowhands who love their animals and the environment. Mick said, I'm proud to be a part of this great cowboy heritage." End quote. I can't tell you how profoundly grateful I am that this lifestyle was once part of me. It's part of my heritage as well. Sacrifice brings forth the blessings of heaven. And one of those greatest blessings is love. What we sacrifice or who we sacrifice for, we love. That is in part what the Lord Jesus meant when he said, I have graven thee on the palms of my hands. End quote. Mick, thank you. You said it way better than I ever could. Second story. Eric Gaudi Midtbone Hogan was born in Norway in 1802. In 1829, he married Helga. One day, Eric overheard some men in his village talking about the wonders and opportunities of America, abundant land to farm, religious freedom, etc. Eric was greatly impressed with these tales and made up his mind that he would go to America as soon as he could dispose of his property and make ready. He was eager to tell his wife and thought she would approve of the change. But to the contrary, Helga was not at all pleased with the thought and did not take him seriously. Eric was determined to go. Helga and her people were determined that he shouldn't. Finally, Eric said, quote, well, I'm going. We will separate. I will take 2 of the children. You may take 2, and we will cast lots for the 5th one. End of quote. Well, that proposal was too much for Helga, and her reply was, where you go, I will go too. Well, after much sorrow and difficulty, they arrived in America, and eventually they settled in Illinois until they could save money, and then they moved on to Lee County, Iowa, which is just 10 miles west of Nauvoo. It was here that Helga and Eric first heard of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They didn't come to America for the gospel. They came to America for the land of opportunity. They were converted. And in 1848, along with the saints, Eric Gowdy Hogan and Helga set out for the Rocky Mountains. Well, somewhere in that journey, Helga became very ill. The doctor declared she wasn't going to live until daybreak. Somewhere in the stupor of illness, Helga heard that. It made her very sorrowful to think of leaving her large family. Later during that same night, Helga experienced a very vivid dream. She saw 3 boys standing by her bedside. She saw a valley and a road running by some springs, and also a tract of land that she wasn't familiar with. The next morning, Helga was very much improved, and she said to those around her, "Last night, one of you said I should not live to see this day, but I shall go to the valley in the mountains, and I will yet have 3 more sons." End of quote. She recovered. Later on the journey, while camped on the Sweetwater River in Wyoming, one of Eric's oxen took sick and died. Now, understand, that's a dangerous situation for the pioneers. They depended on those animals to move them along. No animals, you stay out there. The load was too heavy for the remaining oxen to pull, so what could they do? As Eric pondered on the matter, a lone cow just wandered into camp. There was no owner, nobody knew the animal, so Eric yoked her up, and she pulled the load the rest of the way into the Salt Lake Valley. Shortly after they arrived, they found the owner. She was owned by one Levi Stewart, who had come along the trail before them and had lost her out on the trail. He'd had to move on without her. Eric returned her to her owner. Well, they arrived at the mouth of Immigration Canyon, September 22nd, 1848. On beholding the Salt Lake Valley, Helga said, "This is the valley I saw in my dream." The next morning, Eric rode north out of Salt Lake into today what is South Bountiful or Woods Cross. He found a spot that he really liked, had a spring, and he went back to Helga, loaded her up, and came up the road. As they drove along, Helga recognized the road and the springs as the very ones she had seen in her dream. And upon arriving at the location of their would-be farm, without any designation that this is it by her husband, Helga exclaimed, "This is the spot of ground I saw in my dream." By 1852, all of those sons promised to Eric and Helga had joined the family. The dream in every particular stood fulfilled. Eric and Helga Hogan would live out their days in South Bountiful as faithful farmers. Eric died in South Bountiful, Woods Cross, June 22nd, 1876, at the age of 74. And 8 years later, at the age of 75, Helga joined him. Something Eric said back in Norway stands out to me. He said when he was opposed about the idea of going to America, he had said, "If it does me no good at all to go to America, it will be better for my children." End of quote. How much better it would be for Eric and his numerable posterity now in the faith. There's no way Eric could have known then. Thank the Lord for bringing those select families and pioneers across the plains. to these mountains. Peggy, thank you for that story. Next story. It was about the end of June 1855 in Rawson, Scotland. Elders Andrew Galloway and Edmund Lovell Ellsworth were laboring in that area and spending the night at the home of a brother Powell. Sometime toward early morning, Elder Ellsworth said, "Brother Galloway, are you awake?" Galloway answered that he was, to which Elder Ellsworth then said, quote, "I have had a peculiar dream during the night. It has been repeated to me 3 separate times. Would you like me to repeat it to you?" Galloway answered, "Yes." To which Ellsworth said, "I dreamed I was at home in Salt Lake City, Utah, and went to the president's, Brigham Young's office. I saw President Young, and he said, 'Why, Edmund, we have just been talking about you. We are thinking of having a company of saints cross the plains with handcarts next year. We would like you to take charge of the company. Will you do it?' I said, 'If you say so, I will.'" End of quote. Then Edmund said, "What do you think of the dream?" Elder Galloway said, "Well, I think it's more than a common dream. I would write it in your journal and see what comes of it." End of quote. Elder Ellsworth wrote the dream down in his journal, evidently in very specific detail. 6 weeks later, Elder Ellsworth received a letter from church headquarters from Brigham Young. He opened it up and he read it. Then he retrieved his journal, handed the letter to Elder Galloway, his companion, who read it, and then Edmund showed his journal entry to his companion. They were alike, word for word. End of quote. Now, you should know about this prospect of crossing the plains with a handcart. In 1855, that was considered a bold, daring venture, and it would prove a great trial to many of the saints in Europe. Many refused to even consider it and ridiculed the idea. "Are you crazy? 1,000 miles across the plains with a handcart? You're all going to die." And yet, Elder Edmund Ellsworth was called to lead the way, to organize and lead the first of 10 companies that would come that way. Edmund Ellsworth was to be the handcart trailblazer. Turning to Brother Galloway, Edmund said there in Scotland, "Well, Brother Galloway, what do you say about crossing the plains with a handcart?" And bless his heart, Elder Galloway said with typical Scottish nerve, "There is a motto of a Highland clan, which is my answer. What other men dare, we can do, the Lord helping us." End of quote. Elder Ellsworth then turned to Sister Galloway and asked, "Well, Sister Galloway, what do you say?" Her reply says it all. "I will follow my husband." End of quote. They did. The Galloways followed Captain Edmund Ellsworth in the first handcart company of 1856, which departed Iowa City on June 9th with 273 people. To great fanfare and celebration, it was a success. They arrived in Salt Lake City September 26th, 1856. Sometimes, rarely, the Lord asks us to move mountains by our faith. But most of the time, my friend, He just asks us to climb them and cross them, and He will help us. Let's take a break for just a moment. Let me check a couple of things here. I always have to check and make sure that everything is working the way it's supposed to, or I'm wasting my time. Well, I hope you're doing okay. I hope you're having a great week. I hope that the new year is filled with enthusiasm. Now, the first thing I wanted to mention is that Dennis Lyman and I, in July and again in September, we are taking a Great American Cowboy Tour. Well, actually, it's coming off in July. We're doing this Great American West and the Cowboy Tour. We're going to leave from Salt Lake, up through Cache Valley, up into Jackson Hole, up into Yellowstone, across into the Dakotas, the Black Hills, Crazy Horse, Mount Rushmore, and then back along the Oregon Trail. We will see the Oregon Trail, the Pony Express Trail, the Cattle Drive Trails. Who knows? We might actually even see Boot Hill and a few museums and even a rodeo along the way. That tour will come off in July. And if you want more information and would like to come, go to historyofthesaints.org. Now, the personal thing. I've debated for a long time whether I should put this in here, but what the heck. Some of you have wondered about my crazy maverick lifestyle and why I'm out on the road, going my own way, doing my own thing, wandering from town to town. Well, there's a lot of story behind that, which I don't want to get into, but suffice it to say, I'm out here going from town to town to see your history, to learn the history of these small towns, to meet you, to talk to you, to talk to your people. One of these days, and not too far down the road, in one of these small towns, I want to buy a piece of ground and build a homestead for my family and live out my days. I don't know where that is yet. So that's why I'm out here. I'm like those old pioneers, I guess, in a way. I'm looking for a place to put down my roots. If you have history in your town that you are proud of here in the American Pioneer West, reach out to me. Send me a message. I want to hear it. I want to see it. I want to meet you, and I want to meet your people. Send me a message or send an email to support@glennrawsonstories.com. I will be out here like Moroni, wandering from place to place for the foreseeable future. And if you want to give me, and if you'll give me time, I can probably make it to your small town and tell some stories. I would be honored to do it. I hope I didn't say anything wrong, but that's the truth of what's going on right now, and I'd love to be there. Next story. The year, 1935. The place, somewhere in the interior of Brazil. A woman was pregnant with twins. There were complications. Her husband took her to a local doctor who examined her and told her husband to take her home. She and the babies were going to die, and there was nothing he could do. The husband, indeed, took her home and immediately set out looking for someone who could help. The ailing mother went to bed and sought the Almighty for help. Suddenly, quoting, 3 doctors came to the house. One stood at the door, one at the foot of the bed, and the other one attended to her until the babies were born. Then they promptly left. End of quote. When the husband came back, she asked him who the 3 doctors were which he had sent. He knew nothing of the 3 doctors, as he had sent no one. Several years later, two missionaries came to the interior of Brazil and shared the restored gospel of Jesus Christ with the family. In time, mother, father, and the twin boys joined the church. Years passed. Those two boys emigrated to America and settled in Idaho. Paulo, one of the boys, lived and farmed in the Teton Mud Lake area of Idaho and worked for years as an ordnance worker in the Idaho Falls Temple. He was a great missionary and a kind, good, and humble man. His brother, Peter, also immigrated to the United States and served as a mission president in Brazil and later temple president of the Porto Alegre Temple and a sealer in the Rexburg Temple for many years. End of quote. Just before he passed away in 2022, Paulo related this story I just shared with you to my friend Byron K. Blaine of Territon, who shared it with me. And who were those three mysterious doctors? Quote, After Paulo read the Book of Mormon and learned of the three Nephites, he ascribed to them as being the three doctors who had helped their mother. End of quote. Out of the heartland of Brazil, lost and scattered lambs of the house of Israel, loved, found, and gathered with the saints forevermore. Praise God. Thank you, Blaine. Last story for tonight. I had an insight this week, beautiful one, I'd like to share with you. In one of those rare occasions when the Lord Jesus Christ was actually at home in Capernaum and not out on the road, word spread quickly through the community that he was there, and a crowd came together. In fact, so large of a crowd that they filled the house to overflowing. Jesus was the master teacher, and everyone wanted to hear him. So as many as could gathered in, filling up the house, the windows, the doors. There was no one else. No one else could possibly get in. There was no room. 4 men were seen approaching the house, carrying some sort of a portable bed on which lay a man sick of the palsy. He was paralyzed. They tried to get into the house to Jesus. They couldn't because of the crowd. Selflessly determined, these 4 men lifted their helpless friend up onto the flat roof of the house, where they then tore the roof apart, creating a hole through which they lowered their friend right into the middle of the crowd near Jesus. Matthew records that Jesus looked upon him and said, "Son, be of good cheer. Thy sins be forgiven thee." Matthew 9:2. Well, the scribes were there too. They were listening, and they were indignant at that statement. In their hearts, they said, "Why doth this man speak blasphemies? Who can forgive sins but God only?" Mark 2:7. They didn't speak it aloud. They just thought it. But Jesus heard it. He perceived those ignorant thoughts, and he responded thus, quote, "Why reason ye these things in your hearts? Whether is it easier to say to the sick of the palsy, thy sins be forgiven thee, or to say, Rise, take up thy bed and walk, which is easier. But that you may know that the Son of Man hath power on earth to forgive sins, he saith to the sick of the palsy, I say unto thee, arise, take up thy bed, and go thy way into thine own house. Mark 2, 8 through 11. That moment had to have been electrifying as the paralyzed man suddenly stood up, picked up his bed, and started to walk. The people were all amazed and glorified God and were filled with fear, saying, we have seen strange things today. End of quote. Luke 5:26. That crowd indeed saw strange things. They did not know Jesus, nor comprehend the heart and the power that was granted unto him. The Lord Jesus Christ was chosen and ordained before the creation of the world to atone for the sins of all mankind. By virtue of that atonement, he sat down on the right hand of God to claim of the Father his rights of mercy, which he hath upon the children of men. Moroni 7:27. Rights of mercy. So many people today claim all manner of rights. And usually, they're a claim of rights to do wrong. I wonder if we really do have a right to do wrong and selfishly seek our own interests and lusts. Jesus claims and exercises, think about it, the rights of mercy. There is no one like him. No one has a heart like him. His heart is filled with pure love, compassion, mercy, grace, justice. He has the eternal right, earned of God, to stand betwixt us and justice, to forgive sins, to heal body, mind, and spirit. He faced justice, scorn, hate, and all the evil that could be thrown at him, and exercised those rights then. And he still does. Thank God for one who has the heart that he has. Without him and the kindness of his heart, where would we be? I love the Lord. I witness that he has the rights of mercy, and he exercises them abundantly to our good. Good night, and God bless.